I was a new student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, going into my junior year. Not knowing anyone was really rough. Everyone had already formed their friend groups. The worst part was lunchtime. My school wouldn't let juniors leave for lunch, only seniors, so I had to eat in the cafeteria. I dreaded it because I knew I'd have no one to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself into a random table. When lunchtime finally came, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food, looking for a place to sit. Every single table was taken. I didn't even have the option of sitting alone. But there was one table in the corner with only 2 kids sitting at it. That was the least intimidating spot, so I walked over and asked if I could sit there. They both looked at each other before one of them said, "Yeah." Upon sitting down, I noticed that the 2 were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed all right. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno, and we had a conversation. They even invited me to hang out with them after school. Figured, why not? I had to start somewhere with making friends. I got their numbers, and after school, I went home to drop off my stuff. Shortly after, I got a text from Bruno telling me he and his brother were planning to hang out. He told me to meet them around 9 o'clock that night at the nearby cemetery, which was only a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there. Plus, since the first day of school was on a Friday, we had off the next day. I had nothing else to do, so I agreed. When the time came, Bruno texted me again, asking if I was still coming. I told him I was about to leave and confirmed that we were meeting on the road by the cemetery. He said, "Yeah." So I began my walk in the dark toward the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my move and being the new kid in high school. I also realized how crazy it was that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with 2 kids I had just met. When I got to the little road next to the cemetery, I asked Bruno where they were. He started typing right away and said they were in the woods, hanging by a small lake they wanted to show me. Then he promptly sent his location. I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way, using my tiny phone flashlight as my only source of light. I started calling for Bruno and Antonio, feeling like I was close enough based on the location he sent me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I stopped. They were low and slow, but definitely footsteps approaching me. I called out, "You better not be trying to scare me." They didn't answer. I decided this was stupid. I turned and started walking back toward the road. Those footsteps? They turned from quiet and slow to fast. And before I could even react, someone had their nails digging into my neck, effectively choking me. I heard a familiar voice scream, "Grab him! Grab him!" I managed to break free from the chokehold and sprint toward the road. I knew they followed me until the tree line, but I was faster than them and I could run for miles. And that's exactly what I did. I ran straight home and told my parents. They considered calling the cops, but I thought it would be better to take pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report it to the school the next day. That's what we did. And with the help of the texts I had from Bruno, I was able to get both students expelled. My parents made me block both their numbers. I didn't argue. They also wanted me to confirm that these kids didn't know where we lived. As far as I knew, they didn't. But then, about a week later, something happened. One night, I woke up feeling really cold. I heard the sound of wind blowing into my room. I looked at my window and saw that it was slid completely open. I wondered if my mom had come in to open it. But that made absolutely no sense. It was around 50 degrees outside. I walked over and looked down below. A few feet beneath my bedroom window, there was a part of the exterior of my house that stuck out, creating a sort of ledge. My father always told me to jump onto it in case of a fire. I shut my window and walked over to my parents' bedroom. I gently knocked and opened the door. My mom, groggy, asked what was wrong. "Did you open my window?" I asked. She sat up, looking confused. "No, why?" I told her in a more panicked voice now. "Because it was open all the way. By somebody." She immediately shook my dad awake, telling him to check my room with me. But when he woke up, he just grumbled, "Grow up and go back to sleep." I left their door open as I walked back down the hall to my room. And then, I noticed something. My bedroom door. It was half shut now. When I left, it had been completely opened and I hesitated. Then slowly pushed the door open just a little more, so I could peek inside through the crack. I had a sinking feeling, but I never actually expected to see anything. But there was someone. Someone was hiding behind my door. I screamed for my dad like a little kid, so loud that I was sure the whole neighborhood could hear. My door suddenly slammed shut just as my dad came rushing out of his room toward me. "There's someone in my room!" I yelled. My dad barged in and turned on the light. At that moment, we both saw it. The leg of a person jumping out of my window. My dad ran to the window, then bolted downstairs and out the front door to try to chase them. But he came back a few minutes later, out of breath. He hadn't seen anyone. I was still shaking, full of energy and fear. I was positive it had to be either one or both of those twins. The ones I got expelled. My dad called the police, and I had to explain the whole story again, all the way back to the incident in the woods. My father backed up my story, but without proof of who had entered, there was nothing the cops could do. They just told us to lock our doors and consider installing cameras. Even though I was sure it was them, nothing like that ever happened again. Looking back now, I don't know why I was so willing to meet those kids in the woods at night. I should have realized in the cafeteria that day they looked like trouble. I should have stayed away. Freshman year of high school, 2007. Gym class. Last period. We had a substitute gym teacher on one of the stormiest days of the year. He was an older man, not quite a senior citizen, but definitely graying, probably around 55 to 60. He took attendance. He did a double take when he got to me, which made me uncomfortable. Not to sound full of myself, but I always knew I looked older than my age and honestly pretty good for a freshman. After taking roll, the sub told us to get into our volleyball teams, then disappeared into the hall by the locker rooms. 40 minutes passed. The period was over, and it was time to change and head home. When I got to the locker room, for some reason, my locker wouldn't open. I tried my usual combination over and over, but it just wouldn't click open. Frustrated, I went to find the sub to ask for my combination again, figuring maybe I had just forgotten it. When I told him, he said, "Give me a few minutes. I'll get the list of locker combos." I waited outside his office. Finally, he came out with a book in his hands, already open to a specific page. Then, to my surprise, he walked into the girls' locker room with me. I hadn't expected that. The locker room was almost empty, with just one other girl finishing getting dressed. He walked over to my locker and tried the combination written on the paper. It didn't work. No matter how many times he tried, it wouldn't open. Each time he failed, he would look at me and laugh. I forced myself to laugh along, just to be polite. But then it started getting weird. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll figure this out." Then, still keeping his hand on my shoulder, he tried the combination again. It didn't work. I felt his hand slowly start to inch down from my shoulder to my lower back. That was when I pushed myself away, grabbed my bag and said, "It's okay. I'm late for my bus." He tried the combination one last time, and just like that, the locker opened. He smiled and walked away. I waited until I heard the locker room door shut before I hurried to get changed. And then suddenly, the room went dark. I had just finished pulling up my pants when it happened. In the pitch black, I shoved my locker shut, threw on my backpack and started walking toward the back exit, which led outside. My heart was racing. I had this awful feeling that the sub was standing right by the door, waiting for me. As I reached the end of my aisle of lockers, I was at an intersection. To get to the exit, I had to turn left, but instinctively, I glanced right first to make sure it was clear. There was only one small rectangular window high up near the ceiling, letting in a sliver of light, and that's when I saw him. He was peeking at me from around the lockers. That was all I needed to see. I ran for the exit door. Behind me, I heard him call out, "Wait, wait, it's not what it looks like." I didn't stop. I ran outside, straight into the pouring rain off the high school campus, and walked the rest of the way home. By the time I got there, soaking wet, I had time to process everything. And it hit me. He had probably changed my locker combination as a way to get me alone in the locker room. As for what he planned to do when he cut the lights, I never wanted to imagine. Honestly, I was too emotionally scarred, and Frankly, too embarrassed to tell anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. It was something I kept to myself all these years. Because, truthfully, I just don't feel comfortable talking about it. When I was in high school, I was in the band. My school. Band was basically an easy A. It was either that, orchestra, or chorus. So I went with band. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had a grading system where, as long as you attended class and completed your weekly lessons, you got an A. Unfortunately, toward the end of one quarter, I was missing 2 lessons. Because of that, my grade was a B. After class, I went to Mr. Nicholson and asked if I could make up the lessons. He seemed reluctant, but eventually agreed to let me come in during a lunch period to practice in one of the downstairs storage rooms for credit. That I was more than happy with that because, realistically, I'd probably just play games on my phone instead of actually practicing. The next day, I arrived at the music room during my lunch period. I grabbed my saxophone and headed down the stairs outside the music room, toward the basement area of the music department. That part of the school always had a creepy vibe. Hardly anyone besides the music teachers ever went down there, and the lighting was terrible. That I had only been down there a couple of times before, but I walked down the hallway, passing several doors on either side. Each door led to a small 7 by 7 foot room used for storage, chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and other random things. That I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door behind me. Just in case Mr. Nicholson came down to check on me, I set up my music on a stand, but I didn't actually plan on playing. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started playing games. And then suddenly darkness.it went completely black, except for the faint glow of my phone screen. That I instinctively turned to the light switch, flicking it up and down a few times. Nothing. Confused, I got up from my seat and opened the door, only to be met with more darkness. I held my phone out in front of me, trying to use its weak glow to light up the hallway. I think I had an iPhone 3 back then, and those didn't have flashlights. But even that little bit of light was enough for me to see something that made my stomach drop. Near the end of the hall, one of the storage room doors was open, and I heard something being dragged inside. It sounded like one of those big plastic containers. Then, I heard it heavy, manic breathing followed by animal-like grunting. A second later, I saw a large plastic container being pushed out of that room into the hallway. My instincts kicked in. I turned off my phone screen, stepped back into the storage room, and shut the door as quietly as possible. That I wasn't sure why I was hiding. But the weird sounds, combined with the sudden blackout, put me on edge. Whoever that was in the hallway was blocking the stairs. And, of course, I had no reception in that basement, so I did the only thing that felt safe. I sat in that room and waited, hoping the lights would come back on. But they didn't. It felt like they were never going to. Finally, I decided I needed to try and make my way back upstairs. That I carefully opened the door, holding my phone out for light, and stepped into the hallway. That I inched closer to the stairs. And then I heard it again. A noise. Something shifting. That I quickly crept into the nearest open storage room and shut the door. That I still didn't know what I was hiding from. Could it have been a staff member? A janitor? The only reason I doubted that was because they only appeared after the lights went out. That I stood there in complete darkness, listening, waiting. And then, you know that feeling when you just know someone else is in the room with you? Even if you don't hear them, you can sense them. That feeling hit me like a freight train. My hands were shaking as I lifted my phone and pressed the home button to turn on the screen. Just for half a second. That was all I needed to see. Someone was standing in the corner of the storage room, 0.3 feet away from me. I tried to pretend I didn't see anything, but it was too late. In the silence, I heard a slow, raspy breath. Then, a hand patted my shoulder twice and started squeezing. I panicked. I lunged for the doorknob, struggling to find it in the dark. But as soon as I did, I yanked the door open. The man in the room tried to push it shut again, but I was already out. I ran. I bolted up the stairs and out the door, into the main level of the music hall, where the lights were still on. I ran straight to Mr. Nicholson, completely out of breath, and told him what happened. He called security immediately. They searched the basement storage area but didn't find anyone, just a bunch of music equipment that had been moved around. For the rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lesson. I sat in the room with him and 5 flute players, explaining the whole story in detail. With no cameras in the music hall, There was no way to catch whoever had gone down there and killed the power to the basement. IT seemed like they were trying to steal expensive music equipment, or maybe something worse. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to give my statement. And the rest is history.